You send a distress signal from your ship, and moments later, complete silence. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanation. In the last century alone, over 200 massive vessels have vanished into the ocean depths, taking their crews and their secrets with them. Let's explore 10 disappearances that make even veteran sailors question what really lurks beneath the waves. On March 4th, 1918, the USS Cyclops, a massive naval cargo ship longer than a football field, cuts through the Atlantic waters. 306 souls aboard, thousands of tons of manganese ore in its hold, sailing from Brazil to Baltimore. The weather? Perfect. The crew? Experienced. The ship? Built to handle anything the ocean could throw at it. But there were whispers of trouble even before its final voyage. The ship's captain, George Worley, had a reputation that raised eyebrows. Born in Germany, some questioned his loyalty during World War I. Others reported his erratic behavior, drinking on duty, wearing women's clothing on deck, and terrorizing his crew with brutal discipline. The Cyclops itself had been acting strangely too, suffering from a cracked cylinder that forced it to run on just one of its two engines. The last known contact came when the Cyclops docked at Barbados to resupply. The ship was riding low in the water, heavy with its mineral cargo. But according to port records, the weather was clear, the crew was intact, and everything seemed routine. Then, somewhere between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay, something happened. The Cyclops entered what sailors now call the Devil's Triangle, and vanished without a trace. No distress call broke the silence. No debris floated to the surface. No bodies were ever recovered. The US Navy launched one of the largest searches in maritime history, deploying ships and aircraft across thousands of square miles. Nothing. The Cyclops simply ceased to exist, as if some giant hand had reached up from the depths and plucked it from the surface. Even President Woodrow Wilson declared that only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship. The theories? They range from the plausible to the impossible. Some say the manganese ore shifted suddenly, capsizing the ship. Others point to possible German U-boat activity, though no submarine ever claimed the kill. The more imaginative speak of rogue waves, sea monsters, or even alien abduction. But the truth remains locked in the depths of the Bermuda Triangle, along with the Cyclops and its crew of 306 souls. The ocean wasn't finished claiming its victims. On July 26, 1909, another massive ship met a fate that would haunt maritime history. The SS Waratah, a luxury liner built by Barclay, Curle and Company in Glasgow, was intended to be the pride of the Blue Anchor Line's Australian service. At 465 feet long, weighing 9,339 tons, with space for 100 first-class and 200 third-class passengers, she was designed to compete with the finest vessels of her day. But from her first voyage, something seemed amiss. Engineer Claude Sawyer, a seasoned passenger with decades of maritime experience, reported deeply troubling issues. He observed the Waratah had a dangerous tendency to list heavily, even in moderate seas, taking an unusually long time to right herself. The ship's metacentric height, its fundamental stability, was questionable. Sawyer's concerns grew so intense that he experienced vivid of the ship's destruction. In one dream, he saw a man covered in a canvas shroud standing on the deck, an apparition he interpreted as the Angel of Death. In what would prove to be a fateful decision, he disembarked at Durban, forfeiting the remainder of his journey. He even sent a telegram to his wife that read, "Landed Durban, ship top heavy, unsafe, appear to be overpowered." The Waratah's final journey began in Durban on July 26th, bound for Cape Town. She carried 211 passengers and crew, along with a mixed cargo of wool, ore concentrate, and general merchandise. Captain Joshua Ilbury, a veteran seaman with 30 years' experience, seemed unconcerned by the deteriorating weather conditions. Records show he had previously commanded other Blue Anchor ships without incident, and was highly regarded in maritime circles. What many don't know is that the Waratah was equipped with wireless telegraphy. but it was only operational to a range of about 100 miles. This limitation proved fatal as the weather deteriorated rapidly along South Africa's wild coast. Notorious for its dangerous combination of strong currents, submerged reefs, and violent storms, the area had claimed at least 30 ships before the Waratah. The last confirmed sighting came from the cargo ship Clan MacIntyre. At 6 a.m. on July 27th, the Clan MacIntyre's crew observed the Waratah in rough seas near the Bashi River mouth. Later that morning, they noted an unusual sight. The Waratah was making excessive smoke from her funnels, suggesting she might have been struggling against the worsening conditions. By 9:30 a.m., the Waratah had vanished into a gathering storm, never to be seen again. What followed was one of the most extensive maritime searches of the era. The Blue Anchor Line chartered the SS Sabine to search for 3 months, covering 14,000 miles of ocean. The SS Harlow reported seeing a red flare in the area that night, but found nothing when investigating. Lloyd's of London eventually declared the ship missing, presumed lost, on December 15, 1909. In 1999, Emlyn Brown led a modern search expedition using advanced sonar technology near the Zora River mouth. Despite sophisticated equipment that could detect debris at depths of 1,000 meters, no trace of the Waratah was found. The investigation into the disappearance yielded troubling insights. Naval architects later calculated that the Waratah's design made her particularly vulnerable to capsizing if water entered her hull. Her high superstructure created a dangerous top heaviness, exactly as Sawyer had warned. Some experts believe she may have been struck by a freak wave. The wild coast is known for producing waves up to 100 feet high under certain conditions, powerful enough to snap a ship in half. When Blue Anchor Line's managing director was asked during the official inquiry why no trace of the vessel was ever found, he simply stated, "The sea keeps its secrets." Unlike the Waratah and Cyclops, the MV Joyita didn't disappear without a trace. What she left behind was perhaps even more disturbing. The MV Joyita had an interesting history before her final voyage. Built in 1931 in Los Angeles as a luxury yacht for film director Roland West, the 69-foot wooden vessel was later acquired by the U.S. Navy during World War II and used as a patrol boat. After the war, she was sold as surplus and eventually purchased by Captain Thomas Dusty Miller and his partner Louis Moorings in 1952. They refitted her as a fishing and charter vessel operating out of Samoa. The vessel itself was considered very seaworthy. At 69 feet long with a 15-foot beam, she displaced 40 tons and was powered by two 225 horsepower diesel engines. Her hull contained 71 sealed compartments packed with cork, specifically designed to keep her afloat, even if the hull was breached, a feature that would later prove crucial. On October 3, 1955, the Joyita was scheduled to depart Apia, Samoa, for the Tokelau Islands. The journey should have taken about 48 hours to cover the 300-mile route. However, the departure was delayed when Miller discovered problems with the port engine's clutch. After repairs, they finally set sail around midnight. The passenger list was specific and verified. Captain Miller, first mate Chuck Simpson, 4 crew members, a government official named Herbert Solomon, Dr. Alfred Dennis, 2 patients bound for the hospital at Whakaofo Atoll, a copra buyer, and several others. In total, 9 passengers and 16 crew members were aboard. What's often overlooked is that the weather was deteriorating as the Joyita departed. Weather records show a storm system was developing in the region, with moderate swells and rain squalls likely during their intended route. Additionally, the vessel was actually overdue for its maritime safety inspection, which had been postponed twice in the months before this voyage. When the Joyita failed to arrive at the Tokelau Islands on October 5th, no immediate alarm was raised due to poor communication infrastructure. It wasn't until October 6th that officials in Tokelau radioed Samoa about the missing vessel. Even then, a formal search wasn't launched until October 12th, a critical delay of a full week. the Royal New Zealand Air Force conducted 7 search flights covering approximately 100,000 square miles of ocean, but found nothing. On November 10, 1955, the merchant vessel Tuvalu spotted the Joyita drifting 600 miles west of her intended course, about 90 miles north of Vanuatu, Fiji. She was riding low in the water with her starboard deck awash, but still afloat thanks to her cork-lined hull. The detailed inventory of what investigators found aboard adds to the mystery. All navigation instruments were missing, including charts, the ship's log, and the sextant. The emergency radio transmitter was missing. The chronometer, normally bolted down, had been removed. All 3 life rafts were gone, with their securing lines neatly cut rather than torn away. The dinghy was missing. A doctor's bag was found open with medical supplies strewn about. The main radio was tuned to 2182 kHz, the international distress frequency, but had a fault in the antenna circuit that reduced its range from 200 miles to just 2 miles. Most tellingly, 4 tons of the cargo, primarily copra, a dried coconut product, was missing from the hold. Investigators found the starboard engine covered with mattresses, possibly an attempt to stop a leak. There was 4 inches of water in the engine room, but not nearly enough to threaten the vessel's seaworthiness. The ship's lights were rigged to operate from the starter battery, which was dead. The official marine inquiry, conducted by Captain Isaac Morrow and Magistrate G.H. Craig in January 1956 in Suva, Fiji, documented all these findings, but could reach no definitive conclusion. They stated only that some extraordinary event had caused the crew and passengers to abandon the vessel. The inquiry noted another critical detail. Captain Miller was known to be dealing with financial difficulties and had a 1,000-pound insurance policy on the vessel. This led to some speculation about possible insurance fraud, though no evidence was ever found to support this theory, and Miller himself was among the missing. Despite extensive searches, not a single body was ever recovered, nor was any wreckage from the life rafts or dinghy ever found. The Joyita herself was eventually sold, renamed, and returned to service, only to run aground in 1959 and again in 1962, leading some sailors to consider her cursed. Perhaps the most famous maritime mystery of all time began on December 4, 1872, when the British brig Dei Gratia spotted a ship drifting aimlessly through rough seas about 400 nautical miles east of the Azores. Captain David Reed Morehouse recognized the vessel as the Mary Celeste, an American merchant brigantine he'd encountered previously in New York Harbor. Something was clearly wrong. The ship was yawing strangely, with only a few sails set, moving erratically in the wind. The Mary Celeste wasn't just any vessel. Built in Nova Scotia in 1861, she was originally named Amazon and had her own troubled history even before her famous mystery. She crashed into fishing equipment on her maiden voyage. Her first captain died mysteriously on board, and she collided with another vessel in the English Channel. After being salvaged and renamed Mary Celeste, she seemed to carry her ill fortune with her. When Captain Morehouse sent his chief mate Oliver DeVoe and 2 crewmen as a boarding party, they discovered what would become the quintessential ghost ship. The Mary Celeste was completely abandoned, yet structurally sound. The 103-foot vessel showed signs of having weathered a serious storm, but remained seaworthy. 6 months' worth of food and fresh water were untouched in the galley. The crew's personal belongings, including oilskin boots, pipes, and warm clothing, remained neatly stored. Valuables like the captain's sextant remained aboard. Upon closer inspection, investigators found that the ship's official logbook was still on board, but the daily log slate used for navigational calculations was missing. The ship's navigation charts and chronometer box were also gone. These were items the captain would likely take if planning to abandon ship. Several other details stood out to investigators. The cabin floor and Briggs's bed were wet. A sword lay on the deck, though it showed no signs of having been used in violence. The ship's clock had stopped. The compass box was damaged. Most telling was the missing yawl, lifeboat. which had been securely lashed to the deck but was now gone, its davits pointing outboard as if it had been launched in an orderly fashion. The timeline adds further intrigue. The Mary Celeste had departed New York Harbor on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, age 37, commanded the vessel. Far from an ordinary merchant captain, Briggs came from a prominent seafaring family. His brother Oliver was also a captain, and Benjamin himself was a devout Christian, family man, and part owner of the Mary Celeste. He had brought along his 30-year-old wife, Sarah Elizabeth, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, leaving their 7-year-old son, Arthur, in the care of relatives, a decision that saved the boy from whatever fate befell his family. The crew consisted of 8 experienced seamen: First Mate Albert G. Richardson, Second Mate Andrew Gilling, Steward Edward William Head, and 4 German sailors: Volkert Lorenzen, Arian Martins, Gottlieb Gaudschall, and Baz Lorenzen. All were carefully selected by Briggs himself and had solid reputations. In the cargo hold were 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, not drinking alcohol as is sometimes claimed, worth approximately $35,000, around $800,000 in today's value. The alcohol was intended for fortifying Italian wines. The last entry in the ship's official logbook was dated November 25th, 9 days before the Dei Gratia's discovery. It placed the Mary Celeste just east of Santa Maria Island in the Azores. The sounding rod was found on deck rather than in its storage place, suggesting someone had been checking water levels in the hold shortly before abandoning ship. Below deck, the scene became more puzzling. 9 of the 1,701 alcohol barrels were empty, though the cargo appeared otherwise undisturbed. The main hatch cover was secured, but 2 other hatches were open. The ship had taken on approximately 1 foot of water in the hold. Not enough to threaten sinking, but certainly concerning. The bilge pump was disassembled, possibly in the midst of maintenance. During the subsequent salvage hearings in Gibraltar, Frederick Solly Flood, Attorney General of Gibraltar, initially suspected foul play by the Dei Gratia crew. However, deeper investigation revealed no evidence of violence or wrongdoing. The court considered numerous theories: piracy, though nothing valuable was taken; mutiny, despite Briggs's excellent reputation; a seaquake, waterspouts, and even supernatural intervention. None fit the evidence. Modern analysis points to a more probable explanation involving the cargo. The barrels were made of red oak rather than the more suitable white oak, which is less permeable. Tests by the Smithsonian Institution demonstrated that alcohol could indeed seep through red oak staves. The 9 empty barrels likely leaked fumes into the hold, creating what sailors feared most: a potential explosion. Captain Briggs, aware that alcohol vapors could ignite with catastrophic results, might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution. Maritime protocol would have called for securing a tow line between the ship and lifeboat, allowing them to follow at a safe distance until the danger passed. If this line parted in rough seas, which weather records confirm were present in that region at that time, the occupants would have found themselves adrift, watching helplessly as the Mary Celeste sailed away. Despite a 2,500-pound reward offered for information, equivalent to approximately 3 years' wages for a captain in that era, no trace of the lifeboat or its 10 occupants was ever found. The Mary Celeste herself continued sailing under different owners for 13 more years, shunned by many superstitious sailors as a cursed ship, until she was deliberately wrecked off Haiti in 1885 in an insurance fraud scheme orchestrated by her final owner, while many maritime mysteries occurred in the distant past. Before GPS, satellite phones, and advanced weather forecasting, the case of the SS Faro proves that even in our modern era, the sea can still claim ships with terrifying efficiency. On September 29, 2015, the 790-foot cargo ship El Faro departed Jacksonville, Florida, bound for San Juan, Puerto Rico. This was a routine voyage for the 40-year-old vessel, a route she had sailed countless times before. Her cargo hold contained 391 shipping containers and 294 cars, trucks, and trailers. Her crew consisted of 33 experienced mariners, 28 Americans, and 5 Polish contractors. Captain Michael Davidson, a veteran with over 20 years of experience, commanded the ship. Weather reports indicated that Tropical Storm Joaquin was developing in the region, but forecasts suggested the storm would remain distant from El Faro's planned route. What the captain couldn't know was that Joaquin would rapidly intensify into a Category 4 hurricane, and that the storm's predicted path was dangerously inaccurate. Unlike earlier vessels in our list, the El Faro was equipped with modern communication systems, including satellite phones, email, and a voyage data recorder, essentially a maritime black box. The ship sent regular automated position updates, and the captain emailed his company about the developing storm and his intended route to navigate around it. By the early morning of October 1st, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. At 5:54 a.m., the captain called the ship's owner, Tote Maritime, and left a voice message reporting that the ship had lost propulsion.
Launch, Captain Davidson. Thursday morning.
He stated they were working on the problem, but needed assistance. This would be the last direct communication from El Faro. The automated tracking system sent its final signal at 7:17 a.m. Shortly thereafter, all contact with the El Faro was lost. The ship had sailed directly into the eye wall of Hurricane Joaquin, which by then had intensified to a Category 3 storm, with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour and 50-foot seas. What makes the El Faro tragedy unique is that, unlike other cases on our list, we know exactly what happened in the final hours. After an extensive search that found only debris but no survivors, the vessel's voyage data recorder was recovered from 15,000 feet below the ocean's surface by the USNS Apache, one of the deepest successful recoveries in maritime history. The recorder contained 26 hours of bridge audio, revealing the crew's desperate battle to save their ship. We know that water entered through a hatch or ventilation shaft, flooding a cargo hold. As the water shifted with the ship's motion, the El Faro developed a severe list that caused its engines to fail when the oil pumps lost suction. Without power, the ship was at the mercy of Joaquin's unrelenting winds and waves. The transcript of the bridge recordings paints a grim picture of the crew's final moments. At one point, the captain is heard saying,
Alpha Romeo Oscar El Faro.
"Let's get into the rafts. Let's get the rafts prepared." Minutes later, a crew member shouts, "The water's coming in the house, so the water's coming in from somewhere." These were among the last words recorded. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation concluded that the primary cause of the sinking was the captain's decision to sail too close to the storm's path. Despite having multiple sources of weather information available, contributing factors included inadequate training for heavy weather situations, poor condition of the ship's boilers, and insufficient watertight integrity. All 33 crew members perished. Only one body was ever recovered. The El Faro itself lies 15,000 feet deep on the ocean floor, broken into two main sections. The stern section, containing the ship's engines, is upright on the bottom, while the forward section, including the navigation bridge, came to rest upside down about a quarter-mile away. The ship's 3 lifeboats were found, 2 of them still in their cradles, suggesting the crew never had time to deploy them properly. The El Faro tragedy demonstrates that even with all our technological advances, the ocean remains a formidable and unforgiving adversary. Sometimes, the sea doesn't need to hide its secrets. Even when we know exactly what happened, the loss is no less devastating. While the El Faro tragedy left us with answers, our next maritime mystery offers only questions. The Carol A. Deering has been called the ghost ship of the Outer Banks, and its story contains all the elements of a maritime thriller: possible mutiny, suspected piracy, and government conspiracies. January 31st, 1921. The 5-masted schooner Carol A. Deering was spotted aground on Diamond Shoals, near Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The 255-foot vessel was one of the last of the great wooden cargo schooners, built in 1919 by the G.G. Deering Company for commercial shipping after World War I. The lightship keeper who first spotted the Deering noted something odd. The vessel's sails were still set, unusual for a ship in distress. When Coast Guard personnel finally boarded the stranded vessel on February 4th, after waiting for calmer seas, they discovered an eerie scene. The ship was completely abandoned. The crew's personal belongings remained in their quarters. The galley showed signs of recent meal preparation, with food still laid out as if ready to be eaten. But not a single person remained aboard the ship. Even more puzzling were the ship's missing items. All navigation equipment was gone, including charts, sextant, and chronometer. The ship's anchors were missing. The logbook and ship's papers had vanished. Most telling of all, the ship's 2 lifeboats were gone, suggesting a deliberate evacuation rather than a sudden disaster. What many accounts omit is that investigators found the ship's steering wheel had been removed and the rudder disengaged, rendering the vessel uncontrollable. They also discovered that the ship's compass had been smashed. The binnacle box, housing navigational instruments, was broken open. These details suggest deliberate sabotage rather than abandonment due to natural disaster. The Carroll A. Deering's final voyage had begun in August 1920, when it departed Boston bound for Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal. Captain William H. Merritt commanded the vessel, with his son serving as first mate. But before even leaving American waters, Captain Merritt fell ill and had to be replaced in Norfolk, Virginia. The replacement, Captain Willis Wormel, was a 66-year-old veteran mariner with a sterling reputation. What's particularly notable about Captain Wormel was his prior relationship with the vessel's owner. He had previously been fired by the G.G. Deering Company and only rehired for this voyage out of necessity. This created some tension from the outset. Despite his experience, Wormel had difficulty assembling a reliable crew on short notice. Several of the hastily hired sailors were not experienced deep-water mariners, potentially setting the stage for later conflict. The problems apparently began on the return journey. While docked in Barbados in January 1921, Captain Wormel complained to Captain Hugh Norton of the schooner Edna Smith that he had an unruly crew and specifically mentioned issues with his first mate, Charles McClellan. A crewman from the Deering was overheard threatening, "I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk." Wormel was concerned enough that he offered Norton a revolver for protection, which Norton declined. The last confirmed sighting of the Deering came on January 29, 1921, when the ship was hailed by the Cape Lookout lightship in North Carolina. According to the lightship keeper, Thomas Jacobson, a crew member, not the captain, with a foreign accent, shouted through a megaphone that the ship had lost its anchors during a storm. This interaction struck the keeper as strange enough to note in his log, particularly because the man spoke with what he described as a Scandinavian accent, and the captain should have been the one communicating with the lightship. C.P. Brady, the assistant keeper at Cape Lookout Lighthouse, later testified that when he observed the Deering passing, he noticed only a small number of men on deck, the skeleton crew observation. This suggests the possibility that some crew members may have already left the ship by this point. 2 days later, the Deering was found stranded and abandoned. Strangely, she wasn't the only vessel to meet a mysterious fate in that area around the same time. 5 other vessels vanished completely in what some called the Bermuda Triangle of 1921. One of these, the sulfur freighter SS Hewitt, disappeared with all 38 crew members after departing Portland for Cuba in January 1921. The tanker Ottawa, the collier Wasaic, the passenger steamer Cotopaxi, and cargo vessel Raifuku Maru also vanished in the same region within months of each other. The investigation took unexpected turns. The FBI became involved under the leadership of a young J. Edgar Hoover, as did the State Department and even military intelligence. Partly due to fears of communist sabotage or rum runner involvement during the early Prohibition era. Some speculated that piracy was responsible, pointing to reports of a suspicious steamer seen in the area. Others suggested mutiny, with the crew killing the captain and abandoning ship. One bizarre theory came from a man named Christopher Columbus Gray, who claimed to have found a message in a bottle allegedly from the Deering's engineer, Herbert Bates. Deering captured by oil-burning boats something like Chaser, taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Finder, please notify headquarters of Deering. The message was later proven to be a hoax. The investigation was so significant that 5 government departments became involved: Treasury, Commerce, Justice, State, and Navy. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, later president, took a personal interest in the case. After extensive investigations, the US government officially concluded in 1921 that the disappearance of the crew of the Deering is not susceptible to explanation on the basis of available information. The Carroll A. Deering remained stranded on Diamond Shoals until March 1921, when it was dynamited as a navigation hazard. Salvagers recovered some items, including the ship's bell, which is now displayed at the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum in Hatteras, North Carolina, a tangible reminder of one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. Of all the maritime disappearances on our list, the fate of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror remained a mystery for the longest time, nearly 170 years. The story of these Royal Navy ships stands as perhaps the most haunting exploration disaster in history. May 19, 1845. The ships departed England with great fanfare on what was supposed to be a triumphant scientific expedition. Their mission: discover the fabled Northwest Passage, a sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Arctic. Leading the expedition was Sir John Franklin, a 59-year-old veteran explorer with 2 previous Arctic journeys under his belt. Franklin was a Royal Navy officer who had fought in the Battle of Trafalgar and the War of 1812, and despite his previous Arctic expeditions being plagued by starvation, death, and even allegations of cannibalism, he remained determined to secure his place in exploration history. The Erebus and Terror were no ordinary vessels. Both were specially reinforced bomb ships, originally designed to fire mortars in coastal bombardments. After naval service, they were converted for polar exploration. Their hulls were strengthened with 25-inch thick oak beams to withstand ice pressure and fitted with steam engines salvaged from railway locomotives. Their bows were sheathed in iron to break through ice. They carried cutting-edge heating systems that used pipes to distribute hot air throughout the ships. Unheard of luxury for Arctic exploration of the time. The provisions aboard were equally impressive: 136,656 pounds of flour, 64,224 pounds of salted meat, 7,088 gallons of liquor, 3,600 pounds of tobacco, 4,200 pounds of chocolate, and 2,000 pounds of tea. Their 8,000 cans of preserved food were sealed with lead solder, a new technology that would later prove catastrophic. Additionally, the ships carried daguerreotype equipment, early photography, a hand organ that could play 50 different tunes for entertainment, and libraries with over 1,000 books. The expedition's officers were primarily veteran explorers. Franklin's second-in-command on the Erebus was Francis Crozier, who had already been to Antarctica. James Fitzjames, commander of the Terror, was younger but highly regarded. The crew comprised 129 men in total, carefully selected from thousands of applicants eager to join this prestigious mission. The last time Europeans saw the expedition alive was in July 1845, when whaling ships encountered them in Baffin Bay, between Greenland and Canada. The whalers reported that all was well, and spirits were high aboard Franklin's ships. One of the captains, Martin Pearson, recalled sharing drinks with Franklin himself. After that, the expedition sailed into oblivion. When no word came by 1848, Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin, became instrumental in launching search efforts. She spent her personal fortune and lobbied the Admiralty, the American government, and even the Russian Tsar to send rescue missions. Over the next decade, more than 30 expeditions searched for Franklin and his men, turning the disaster into one of history's largest search operations. As searchers pushed into the Canadian Arctic, they began finding disturbing clues. In 1850, on Beechey Island, 3 graves were discovered. Those of John Torrington, William Brain, and John Hartnell, all crewmen who had died during the expedition's first winter. The bodies, exhumed in the 1980s, were found to be remarkably preserved in the permafrost, with facial features, hair, and clothing intact after more than a century. In 1854, explorer John Ray met Inuit hunters who possessed items from the Franklin expedition, including silver forks and spoons engraved with officers' initials. They told a horrifying tale. About 40 white men had been seen dragging sledges, starving, and falling down and dying as they walked along. More disturbingly, the Inuit reported evidence of cannibalism, saying the bodies showed cut marks and that cooking pots contained human remains. Ray's report of cannibalism caused a scandal in Victorian England, with Charles Dickens himself writing articles denouncing the claims and suggesting the Inuit had murdered the explorers. The most significant discovery came in 1859 when a note was found inside a stone cairn on King William Island by searcher Leopold McClintock. The note, actually 2 messages written on the same paper a year apart, revealed a harrowing timeline. The first message, dated May 28, 1847, was optimistic. All well. The second message, added around the margins in April 1848, reported that Franklin had died on June 11, 1847. The ships had been trapped in ice since September 1846, and a total of 24 men had died, including 9 officers. The survivors, now led by Crozier and Fitzjames, were abandoning the ships and attempting to reach civilization by trekking to the back river. The note's final words, "And start on tomorrow, 26th, for Back's Fish River." None would make it. Over subsequent decades, searchers found scattered bones, buttons, silverware, and other artifacts along the presumed escape route across King William Island. Reports from Inuit who had encountered the doomed men or their remains painted a grim picture of their final days. According to their accounts, some men were so desperate they resorted to cannibalism. Others went mad, and some even carried the severed limbs of their dead comrades as they staggered south. Between 1860 and 1880, American explorer Charles Francis Hall and later Frederick Schwatka interviewed numerous Inuit witnesses who had seen the Franklin survivors. One elderly woman described how she had watched from hiding as a group of about 40 emaciated white men dragged their boat across the ice. Their faces were black, likely from frostbite and scurvy, and they communicated with sign language, suggesting they were too weak or ill to speak. The ships themselves remained elusive until September 2014, when the Canadian government's Victoria Strait expedition located the wreck of HMS Erebus in Wilmot and Crampton Bay in the Queen Maud Gulf. 2 years later, in September 2016, the Arctic Research Foundation located HMS Terror in Terror Bay on the southwest coast of King William Island. While Inuit testimony had helped guide searchers to the general area, the precise location was discovered through modern search methods. The discoveries revealed crucial information that changed our understanding of the disaster. The Terror was found in pristine condition, sitting upright on the seafloor, with its hatches battened down, anchors stowed, and some windows still intact with their glass panes. This suggests it was deliberately anchored and abandoned in an orderly fashion, rather than crushed by ice as long believed. Marine archaeologists described the wreck as frozen in time and the best preserved shipwreck I've ever seen, with artifacts still in their original drawers. The Erebus, meanwhile, showed signs of having been extensively searched by the Inuit. The wreck was more damaged, with the upper deck collapsed, and evidence that large objects had been removed. Items recovered included the ship's bell, brass buttons, plates, a medicine bottle, and part of the wheel. Modern analysis of recovered human remains revealed evidence of lead poisoning from the soldered food cans, with lead levels in some bones measuring up to 20 times higher than normal. This poisoning may have impaired the crew's decision-making abilities and exacerbated their suffering through symptoms like fatigue, cognitive problems, and irritability. Cut marks on bones confirm the Inuit accounts of cannibalism, with forensic analysis showing methodical flesh removal consistent with survival cannibalism. DNA testing of remains found on King William Island has identified several specific crew members. In some cases, these identifications match the names recorded on the recovered artifacts, confirming the accuracy of the expedition's records. Perhaps most haunting is what the expedition's route revealed. The ships had sailed into a dead end, Victoria Strait, which is typically choked with ice even during summer. Had they chosen a different path, just slightly to the east, they might have succeeded in navigating the Northwest Passage. Ironically, the strait they were seeking, later named the Ray Strait after the explorer who first gathered evidence of their fate, was just a short distance away. Climate research has shown that the years 1845 to 1848 were unusually cold in the Arctic, with summer ice failing to melt in many areas. The expedition had the misfortune of attempting its journey during what's now recognized as the tail end of the Little Ice Age, when the Northwest Passage was essentially impassable even in summer. The tragedy led to significant technological and procedural changes in polar exploration. Future expeditions carried improved survival gear, more varied food sources, and better communication protocols. The entire approach to Arctic exploration shifted toward adopting Inuit techniques for travel, shelter, and food acquisition, rather than relying solely on European methods. Today, the wrecks of Erebus and Terror are protected as Canadian National Historic Sites and are jointly managed by Parks Canada and Inuit organizations. Ongoing underwater archaeology continues to yield new discoveries, slowly revealing more details about one of history's most infamous maritime disappearances. According to the story, sometime between June 1947 and February 1948, ships in the Strait of Malacca reportedly received a disturbing SOS message. SOS from Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including Captain, dead, lying in chart room and on bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. I die. The tale continues that an American merchant ship named Silver Star responded and discovered the Ourang Medan with its entire crew dead, their faces frozen in expressions of terror with no visible injuries. Before the Silver Star could tow the vessel to port, the Ourang Medan supposedly caught fire and exploded, sinking with all evidence. What's crucial to understand about this story is that, unlike other cases in our countdown, there is no verified documentation of these events ever occurring. No official records of a vessel named Ourang Medan, which roughly translates to man from Medan in Malay, have been found in Lloyd's shipping registers or any other maritime databases from the period. While the Silver Star was a real vessel, no logs or official reports mention a rescue attempt of a ghost ship. The first published mention of the Ourang Medan appeared in a Dutch-Indonesian newspaper called De Locomotief in February 1948. This brief report lacked specific details and provided no sources. The story resurfaced in May 1952 in the U.S. Coast Guard's publication, Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, written by someone identified only as Baynert, whose identity remains unknown. Further articles appeared in Dutch publications in 1954 and 1955, each adding new details not present in earlier accounts. The story gained wider attention after being included in a 1955 book called Beyond the Senses by Vincent H. Gaddis, who later popularized the term Bermuda Triangle. Researchers who have attempted to verify the incident have encountered dead ends. No records from Dutch, Indonesian, Malaysian, or American maritime authorities mention investigating such an incident. The lack of contemporary newspaper coverage is particularly telling. A ship full of mysteriously dead crew members would have been front-page news. Various theories have been proposed to explain what might have happened if the incident were real. These range from cargo hold leaks of hazardous chemicals like potassium cyanide, which could cause both death and an explosion, to carbon monoxide poisoning from a malfunctioning boiler. More exotic explanations involve paranormal phenomena or even extraterrestrial encounters. Some researchers have suggested the story might be connected to unrecorded transport of chemical weapons from Japanese Unit 731 after World War II, but no evidence supports this theory. Others point out that the symptoms described, terrified expressions and outstretched arms, are consistent with certain types of poisoning. The Ourang Medan story exemplifies how maritime legends develop and evolve. Each retelling added new dramatic elements, from the specific descriptions of the crew's frightened expressions to the ship mysteriously exploding just as investigators were about to discover its secrets. Whether based on a real maritime disaster that went officially undocumented, a deliberate hoax, or simply a sailor's tale that grew with each retelling, the Ourang Medan has secured its place in maritime lore. Unlike the other disappearances in our countdown, the Ourang Medan's greatest mystery may be whether it existed at all. Our final maritime mystery brings us to more recent times and closer to home. On November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, at the time one of the largest ships on the Great Lakes, vanished during a violent storm on Lake Superior, taking all 29 crew members with her. What makes this case particularly compelling is that it happened in an era of advanced shipping technology, yet the exact cause remains debated to this day. The Edmund Fitzgerald was a titan of the lakes. Built in 1958 at Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan, the 729-foot-long freighter was a record-breaking laker, designed to carry iron ore from mines near Duluth, Minnesota, to steel mills in Detroit and Cleveland. Her launch was a major event, attended by more than 15,000 people, including Edmund Fitzgerald himself, the president of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, which had commissioned the vessel. For 17 years, she was the workhorse of the Great Lakes, setting seasonal haul records 6 times. Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran with 44 years of sailing experience, commanded the vessel on her final voyage. At 63, McSorley was nearing retirement and had an impeccable safety record. The crew of 29 ranged in age from 21 to 63 and included veterans and newer sailors alike. First mate Jack McCarthy was a respected 15-year veteran with the shipping company, while third mate Michael Armagost was on only his 3rd trip aboard the Fitzgerald. On the afternoon of November 9th, 1975, the Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore pellets, bound for Zug Island near Detroit. The weather forecast mentioned a storm developing over the plains, but nothing that seemed unmanageable for such a large vessel. The Fitzgerald was soon joined by another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, and the two ships traveled in tandem across Lake Superior. By morning, on November 10th, conditions had deteriorated drastically. The National Weather Service issued gale warnings with predicted winds of 35 to 50 knots, and waves reaching 15 feet. By afternoon, the situation had worsened into a full-blown November storm, one of the most dreaded conditions on the Great Lakes. Winds howled at 60 knots, nearly 70 miles per hour, and waves towered to heights of 25 feet or more. The Anderson recorded gusts of 86 miles per hour and waves as high as 35 feet. What's often overlooked is that the Fitzgerald had experienced previous structural issues. In 1969, she had struck a lock wall, resulting in damage. In 1973 and 1974, she suffered storm damage to her railing. During the 1974-75 winter layup, steelwork was performed on her, replacing her weather cover and refurbishing other equipment. These repairs later became a point of interest for investigators. Around 3:30 p.m. on November 10th, Captain McSorley radioed the Anderson to report that the Fitzgerald was taking on water had lost 2 vent covers and had developed a list. Unlike earlier vessels in our countdown, the Fitzgerald was in radio contact with both other ships and the Coast Guard throughout much of the ordeal. McSorley also reported that his pumps were working continuously to combat the flooding. At 3:50 p.m., the Fitzgerald deviated from her course to seek shelter from the storm, heading more southerly toward the Canadian shore. At 4:10 p.m., McSorley reported that his radar was out, and he asked the Anderson to provide navigational guidance. Captain Cooper of the Anderson reported seeing the Fitzgerald on radar, apparently slowing and getting closer to the Canadian shore. Despite the severe conditions, the situation didn't appear desperate. At 5:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald was advised to change course slightly to reach the safety of Whitefish Bay. At 7:10 p.m., the Anderson's captain, Jesse Cooper, radioed to ask how the Fitzgerald was managing. McSorley's final words were simple and haunting: "We are holding our own." Just 10 minutes later, at 7:20 p.m., the Anderson's radar lost contact with the Fitzgerald. There was no distress signal, no mayday call, no indication of imminent disaster. Concerned about the sudden disappearance, Captain Cooper called the Fitzgerald several times but received no response. At 8:32 p.m., Cooper contacted the Coast Guard to report the vessel missing. The Coast Guard launched an immediate search but found only lifeboats, life jackets, and other debris. No survivors were recovered. The next day, the wreck was located just 17 miles from the safety of Whitefish Bay. In 530 feet of water, the ship had broken into 2 main sections, with the break occurring midship. The first underwater surveys were conducted by the U.S. Navy's Curve 3 submersible in May 1976, producing detailed sonar images of the wreckage. What these surveys revealed was puzzling. The ship appeared to have plunged nose first into the lakebed with such force that it broke in half upon impact. The official Coast Guard investigation, released on July 26, 1977, concluded that the vessel had probably taken on water through ineffectively secured hatch covers, eventually losing buoyancy. According to this theory, the Fitzgerald gradually filled with water until she reached a critical point where she suddenly plunged to the bottom. However, this explanation has been challenged by many maritime experts, including the Lake Carriers Association, who argued that the hatches were designed to be watertight and that proper inspection procedures were followed before departure. Alternative theories include the possibility that the Fitzgerald struck the 6-fathom shoal, an uncharted reef northwest of Caribou Island, damaging her hull. That massive waves, known as Three Sisters or rogue waves, caused catastrophic structural failures, or that the ship suffered from undetected damage from previous voyages. One crew member from the Anderson reported observing a wall of water hit the Fitzgerald shortly before she disappeared from radar. A particularly compelling theory suggests the Fitzgerald experienced shoaling, where a vessel enters shallower water and essentially rides up onto a wave, with the bow and stern supported, but the middle unsupported. The massive weight of 26,000 tons of iron ore could have caused the ship to break apart under its own weight in this position. Later investigations using more advanced technology have yielded additional clues. In 1994, an expedition led by Canadian explorer Joseph McInnes produced detailed photographic evidence showing that the Fitzgerald's propeller was intact and the rudder positioned at 10 degrees, suggesting the ship was still under power and maneuvering when she sank. In 1995, a team led by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society recovered the ship's bell from the wreck, now displayed at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum as a memorial. The disaster led to significant changes in Great Lakes shipping regulations, including mandatory survival suits, depth finders, positioning systems, and upgraded vent coverings and hatch closures. The Edmund Fitzgerald story gained national attention through Gordon Lightfoot's ballad, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which memorialized the tragedy and her crew. Released in 1976, the song became a hit and ensured the Fitzgerald would not be forgotten. Today, the wreck lies at the bottom of Lake Superior, a federally designated gravesite protected by Canadian law. Each November 10th, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum holds a memorial service, ringing the Fitzgerald's recovered bell 29 times, once for each crew member, and a 30th time for all mariners lost at sea. The families of the crew eventually received compensation through a settlement with the ship's owners, but many remained unsatisfied with the official explanation for the disaster. In 2006, the families of the Fitzgerald's crew organized a memorial service for the 29 sailors, held at the Mariners' Church in Detroit, the same church referenced in Gordon Lightfoot's famous ballad. From the USS Cyclops vanishing without a trace in 1918 to the Edmund Fitzgerald's sudden sinking in 1975, these 10 disappearances remind us of the ocean's power to create enduring mysteries. What's most haunting about these disappearances isn't just the loss of life, but the lack of closure for the families left behind, with no bodies to bury and no certain explanation of what went wrong. In an age where we can track a smartphone to within a few feet, the idea that entire vessels with dozens or hundreds of people aboard can simply vanish seems almost impossible, yet it happens, reminding us that despite all our technological advances, nature remains the ultimate authority. If you enjoyed this video, click on the video shown on screen to learn more Did You Know facts.